Chapter 4, Lillian's Parents, 1959. "Lou!" Mom yelled long and loud with a questioning tone. Lillian arrived at her mama's bedroom door, slightly bracing herself for what was to come, not knowing what to expect. "Yes, Mama," she questioned. "Have you seen my light blue scarf, the one with the large diamond shapes on it?" "I have," offered Lil, with some hesitation in her voice. "It's in the third drawer down the left side of your dresser." "Now, why would it be there?" "I tried it on to wear with my new blouse, but it didn't look right, so I put it away." "Lillian Francis, be more aware next time. It goes in my second drawer." Although Lillian thought she would be in big trouble since Mama said her full first name and middle name, to her relief, she was let off the hook with only a warning. Nothing could break Mama's happy demeanor today. They were packing to visit friends in Basile, Louisiana. Mama's best friend from childhood married Daddy's best childhood friend. In fact, the two couples were married in a double wedding 20 years before. Now, the two families would be coming together to celebrate the 20th anniversary of their double wedding day. "Lulu, come help me load this car," Daddy demanded as he tilted his head toward the front door from inside the home. Lillian knew the deal. A man with no sons relies on his daughter for assistance. She dutifully got out there as her father's aide without saying a word. All packed and ready to go, the family of three set out for a Sunday drive. Hilda and Raymond had two daughters. One was 16 like Lou. The other was 2 years their senior. Hilda had prepared a pork roast from the hog Raymond had slaughtered just for the occasion. On the side was a jambalaya loaded with ham and shrimp, along with whole cobs of fresh shucked corn, buttered corn, and homemade yeast rolls. One thing that was never proven wrong was that Hilda could really cook. After dinner, this group of 7 played games as they listened to the comedy programs on the radio. "We interrupt this regularly scheduled programming to bring you a bleak weather report." The radio announcer reported that the weather had taken a turn for the worse. Winds were picking up. Thunderstorms had been predicted for the area since the day before, but now the weather was expected to accelerate to hurricane-force winds. The group continued playing as if they hadn't heard a thing about any tempestuous weather. "QUIZ. That'll be 20 points for me, please, Madam Scorekeeper," Lillian's dad said in a slow, deliberate, yet quite playful vocal tone. Francis, or Francis, was the absolute king of Scrabble, but no one could figure out how. Was it luck or some strange strategy that no one else understood? His wife Claudette said, "Francis, you can't spell at all. You can hardly read on the 3rd grade level." "But I still whip everybody's tail at this game, every time we play." Francis laughed a mischievous chuckle. "Hilda, it's your turn," Raymond shouted so she would hear him from the kitchen. Just then, Hilda pranced into the living room with an enormous bowl of freshly popped popcorn sprinkled with salt. Before she sat down, Hilda handed the bowl to Claudette and instructed her to pass the bowl around the table for all to take what they wanted. Claudette took less than what she wanted and passed the bowl to her left, handing it to Janelle, Hilda's oldest daughter. Janelle, who didn't like popcorn, handed the bowl left, crossing over her mother, who had already taken some popcorn for herself while she was in the kitchen. Hilda's youngest daughter, Kate, took enough popcorn for herself and Lillian to share. Lillian grabbed the bowl and handed it swiftly to Raymond because it was her turn to make a word on the board. Raymond placed the bowl on the floor between himself and Francis, Lil's dad. Hilda got up and picked the bowl up from the floor and placed it onto the side table in the living room. Food doesn't go on the floor, Ray. If y'all want more popcorn, get it from here. Z-E-B-R-A. And my B ended up on a double-letter score, Lillian exclaimed, while wearing the huge grin of gloating pride. Hilda laughed at Lillian as she walked back to her chair. Suddenly, lightning embellished the room like a fiery diamond catching the eye of a greedy pirate seeking a treasure. Soon to follow was the baritone voice of thunder roaring through the home, causing vibrations to quake at the very moment when Hilda's butt hit the chair. The timing of it made everyone laugh out loud after they were shaken and startled from the intrusive blast. The rainfall grew harder and louder too, giving way to the crackles and thumps from stones of hail on the rooftop. Wind played the shutters back and forth between the windows and the siding in 3/4 percussion time. Claudette grabbed the cross hanging from her neck and recalled all she had learned in St. Maurice's church over the course of her lifetime. She began to recite the rosary to herself in a tone that was intended to be in her head, but her mumble became more audible as the prayers progressed. Hilda clung to each of her daughters who sat on either side of her. Disturbed by the weather, Lillian spilled her lemonade. She tried using 2 napkins to wipe the mess of wasted lemonade from her skirt. The spill, being what seemed uncontrollably large, proved too much for Lil's tiny paper napkins. She rose up to excuse herself to the restroom to finish her task of drying off. Getting up to go had her realizing how much lemonade made it to the floor beneath her chair. Raymond said, when he noticed the look of dismay on her face, "Go ahead to the bathroom, child. I'll get this mess up from the floor for you." Raymond ventured to the kitchen to grab the 2 dish towels from the counter to diffuse the lemonade mishap. No sooner did the 2 of them leave the living room did the weather take an immediate turn toward even worse conditions. Lightning brought daylight across the small country town for one split second. Then thunder trailed closely behind. Before anyone could do anything, 2 ceiling joists gave way, carrying the ceiling, the attic, the junk in the attic, and the entire roof down with them. All of this happened before the eyes of Raymond, who was holding 2 dry dish towels in his hands. When he turned around to check on Lil, the sound of a locomotive entered his ears and animated through his arms and legs as a running shove into the teenage girl who was just exiting the restroom. He pushed her back until she fell into the claw-footed bathtub. Raymond covered her face with the dish towels and dove into the tub himself. He pulled the shower curtain down to cover them as they lay afraid and cramped. The house trembled unfathomably. Maybe it was as scared as the humans inside of it. The shaking became as wild as a blender crushing ice cubes into ice shavings. The only stability around was the porcelain, claw-footed bathtub holding the only 2 occupants of the home who would survive the night. The home was in shambles. There was no trace that a roof ever existed. Aside from a few studs here and there, the fireplace and its chimney, and the commode beside the tub, not much was left. The bathtub still contained Lil and Raymond. A drizzle persisted, but otherwise the world became quite still. The sounds and movement were no longer detectable. Lil lifted her head and felt a sharp sting on her forearm. With only the light of the moon as a guide, she could distinguish glistening on that same arm. Lil delicately pulled a large shard of glass from her arm and threw it in the distance. She determined that the excess wetness from her arm must be blood. She wrapped one of the dish towels around her forearm tightly and added some compression with her opposing hand. Mama Broussard always said, compression stops blood flow. Raymond popped his head up on the opposite end of the bathtub and said, "We'll have to stay put here till daybreak. It's going to be dangerous to walk out there with no light to see what you're stepping on. Get you some sleep, child." Lillian rested her head on the rim of the tub gently and started to wonder. She thought the thoughts one would think to think at a time such as this one. Each thought was more morbid than the next one. As one would pop into her mind, she would dismiss it as to not give it life. Tears flowed from her eyes onto her already wet face. She didn't recognize any of the emotions she felt. She just cried, silently. She just felt like crying cries. Cries that were generated from an unrecognizable emptiness, mixed with a confusion that spun her brain. The rest of the night was long, and Lil didn't remember sleeping at all. She felt numbness in some areas, pain in others. They had been cramped and folded into one position for the entire night. Now daylight was breaking, and now was the moment of anticipation. She would finally be released from the safe haven she had been incarcerated by the previous evening. Stepping out into daylight, the two could barely walk from their extensive confinement in the bathtub, and Raymond had no shoes. The slippers he wore in his comfortable home while playing Scrabble were misplaced while diving into the tub during the wild weather. Raymond acclimated his feet to the ground and began to roam his property aimlessly. Lil caught a glimpse of his face for a moment and saw a man unlike the one she knew all her life. He went from being a boisterous jokester, not much different from her own father, to appearing inconsolably saddened and feeble. His gait was slow and hesitant, and his eyes seemed to have aged 30 years in one night. She kept staring to satisfy the curiosity of how this had happened. The jolly man of only 43 years old was gone. Raymond was silently pacing the wreckage with a continuous flow of tears dragging down both sides of his face. Shortly thereafter, a man stopped his car in front of the address and asked if they needed anything. "Lil, do you want me to drive you back to the Grove?" Raymond asked after he glanced to see if he still owned a car. The guy who Raymond recognized to be Mr. Jones from the feed store interrupted. "You from Pecan Grove, ma'am?" "Yes, I am from the Grove. Uncle Raymond, do you feel like you can bring me all the way back? Do you have any place to stay? Do you want to stay at our house?" Lil inquired. "And of course you do have a car, but unless you have keys in your pocket, that car isn't going anywhere." "I guess I hadn't thought about all that yet," Raymond wondered aloud. "Why don't you two come with me? I'm on my way to the church in town. They can get you all settled with dry clothes and some hot oatmeal. Does that sound good?" Raymond desperately wanted to stay at the scene in case his wife or their friends suddenly returned, but he knew deep down that he ought to get the youngster home. It seemed this would ultimately be his responsibility. He also knew deep down that his wife and their friends would surely not be coming back. Raymond said that he needed to pick up one item he had seen earlier. He walked about 15 feet away and bent over to pick up a framed photograph from the ground of the area that he assumed used to be his bedroom. The glass was cracked and the picture had droplets on it, but the frame remained intact. It was the last professional photographer photo of his family. Hilda fussed for 2 years, insisting that they needed a new family photo to replace the previous one when the girls were 8 and 10. At this moment, Raymond was glad they did. 2 solid weeks passed before all the bodies of the family members had been found. Raymond moved in with his brother and sister-in-law while he awaited the rebuild of his own home. Unfortunately, sadness, loneliness, and the guilt of having survived a tornado with his family brought him to an early grave. Without his family, brought him to an early grave. Lil had help from the aunt and uncle she moved in with to sell her home. Immediately following the home sale, she darted to New York to fulfill her lifelong dream, never having grieved.